Thank you for tuning in and welcome back to the Sandwich of Coherency. So let's just go ahead and jump right into this. Recently, there's been a lot of complaints coming from New York and DC. What are they upset about? Well, apparently it seems that for the past few years, as they've been screaming, we must do something for the illegals. We have to let all the illegals in. If you don't let the illegals into America, you're a racist. There is room for everybody. There's enough to go around for everybody. We need to bring everybody from around the world into the United States, illegal or illegally. And it seems to me that there's been more encouragement of people to flood into the nation illegally than legally. And that makes no sense at all. Because literally what they want is for immigration policies to be changed. And yes, I agree that we can make some changes to the United States immigration policies. But you don't fix it by destroying the nation in the process. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And to point this out, Congress doing all the bitching and all the screaming and all the moaning. The Democrats in the House and the Senate could have done this years and years and years and years ago. They could have been working on immigration policy, like codifying Roe versus Wade. I mean, they've only had since 1973. I mean, how many more decades do they need to do their job? But like I said before in previous episodes, they had no intention of actually doing their jobs, because if they were to do that, then they could not run on it every election cycle to garner more votes. When I get into office, I'm going to codify Roe versus Wade. 2 years later, if you vote me back in, I'm going to do it. 2 years later, if you vote me back in, I'm going to do it. 2 years later, if you vote me in, I promise I will do it. And for some reason, Democrats keep saying, yeah, I like that guy. He said he's going to do it, so I'm going to vote for him. As they forget that for the previous 2 years, you've been protesting in the street. Yeah, my body, my choice. And you vote for the same people that say they're going to do this stuff, and they never do it. And you vote for them again. And then you get pissed off that they don't do it. And you keep doing it over and over again. But before I sail too far past the point, the reality is that migrants have been flooding into DC and New York. This is 3 months ago when Abbott decided to start doing this process. Now, the people in DC and New York have been screaming for more and more and more and more and more and more illegal immigrants to come into the nation, while ignoring the border towns that have been complaining about the policies, how their towns are overrun with crime and strife. They cannot afford what's happening. They don't have the funds. Ranchers being attacked, cattle murdered. These are things that are happening that the DC Democrats don't want you to think about, because as they say, well, I mean, why should you be worried about it? They're just trying to get to a better life. Okay, this is mostly economic migrants, let's be honest with ourselves, and quit calling them asylum seekers. These are economic migrants. We know that's what they are. They're trying to come to achieve a better life in the United States. But here's the thing. At no point has anybody said, hey, maybe we should do something about what's going on in these places. We keep sending them money every year, and their people keep coming here. Why don't we address the problem? Oh, sure, Kamala Harris will go down there and pretend like they give a fuck. But again, she hasn't even made it to the U.S. southern border. Joe Biden hasn't made it to the U.S. southern border. These people have done absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. But they have done a lot of threatening to schools to cut the federal funding if they don't want boys and girls bathrooms, because parents don't feel safe with boys and girls bathrooms. I don't care how you feel, if that's what you want. And we're all entitled to our opinions. I don't think it's right. You should not expose children to that. But that's a whole nother conversation that if you check out the previous episodes, you might find the conversations with Delvin, and we go deep into that one. The shit's hilarious to me. But again, the point is you have Democrats threatening states across the United Nation, across the entire nation. But now they're complaining about the migrants being sent into DC and New York. They say they can't handle it. We don't have the space. We don't have the funds. We can't handle this influx of all these illegal immigrants. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Stop sending us all your illegal immigrants. They weren't supposed to leave your state. You were supposed to keep them. Lest we forget that the White House administration has been flying illegals in the middle of the night all over the United States to red areas, mostly. It was okay for them to do that. So the Republicans just jumped on board with what they were doing and said, we're going to help you out. We noticed that not many of them are coming to New York and DC. Let us help you out. You care so much. You want to do so much. Here, have some. Help us out. Now the mayor of DC, she's upset because she has to do what the Democrats in DC wanted the rest of the nation to do. New York is mad because they have to do what they wanted the rest of the nation to do. The loudest bleeding hearts in this entire argument throughout all of this are the ones who want to do the absolute least. But they're the loudest ones saying how we need to do this. You need to do this. When they say we, they mean you. We doesn't include them. When they say we, they're speaking for you and whomever else is beside you, but they are not part of that. Now in this next bit we're going to get into, it's very, and it shouldn't sit right with anybody. The simple fact that you have illegal immigrants coming into the country. They have no identification. First off, they're illegal to begin with, so the fact that they're being allowed to use things other than proper identification to board planes to travel through the United States is a little problematic, and it should be that way to everybody else. And I know people say, well, they don't have identification. They should, we should try and find ways to make it easier for them to travel on planes throughout the United States. All the whole while forgetting that as an American citizen, you're not getting on that freaking plane without it. I mean, you sneeze the wrong way and you go on a no-fly list. Let's be honest, as an American citizen, they have not made it easier for you to get on an airplane. Okay? They've not made it easier for you to get on an airplane. Show up to the airport. Now, I believe that maybe sometimes you might be able to get slipped through on that one, but show up without identification. Show up without a state ID of any form. Passport, nothing. Show up with no photo identification and see how far you get with getting on that plane. So that should make you wonder, why are they making exceptions to let people who enter the country illegally that don't have identification be allowed to use arrest warrants and other paperwork that signifies they broke the law to begin with, to get on planes and travel across the United States? Imagine that you're an American going to get on a plane and you have a warrant for your arrest. They don't let you get on the plane. Is there a possibility that may have happened before? Sure. It's I could see it maybe happening. I guess maybe if you're only the warrant for your arrest is because you didn't show up for court. But even in that situation, I don't think they're letting you get on a plane to leave the area where you're at. So, before we waste any more time, let's just go ahead and jump into this clip with Josh Hawley.
Mr. Pekowski, thanks for being here. I've got some questions for you, and to be frank with you, I've got some concerns about your record. Let's start with your decision to allow illegal immigrants to use arrest warrants as a form of ID at TSA checkpoints. In response to a congressional inquiry on this, you responded, I'm going to quote you now, TSA established a process where it will accept certain DHS-issued forms for non-citizens and non-U.S. nationals who do not otherwise have acceptable forms of ID for presentation at security checkpoints. And then you went on to list the forms that TSA would accept that included a warrant for arrest of an alien, a warrant of removal or deportation, the order of release on recognizance, an order of supervision, a notice to appear, an arrival and departure form, which included a printout of an electronic record, or an alien booking record. Now, I wrote to you on January 31st of this year asking you about this. Have you responded to this letter yet?
No, sir, we have not responded, but I will respond.
I didn't think so.
I will respond tomorrow.
Okay. Right after today's hearing. It's amazing how that works.
Well, actually, I saw a response earlier, and it didn't meet.
Do I have the response?
No, you don't, but you'll have it tomorrow.
Right after today's hearing. Maybe we should have more of these hearings. We may get more. Today, this is July, isn't it? I sent it to you in January. That's a very long time to respond to a letter that is 2.5 pages long. So let's just see if we can get some answers now. How many individuals have presented TSA with arrest warrants or deportation notices and were permitted to travel in this calendar year?
Under 1,000, sir.
How does this policy comport with 18 U.S.C. 1325, which criminalizes improper entry into the United States by an alien?
Sir, these individuals that have these arrest warrants, those arrest warrants were issued by the Border Patrol or a customs officer, and they serve as a beginning to our identity verification process. So you can't walk up to a checkpoint, wave that form, and then you go right through into screening. We go through a process to verify that you are the person that you claim to be, and that you are receiving the level of screening, which always includes enhanced screening when people don't have the proper identification.
So if somebody who presents an arrest warrant is subject to an in-person interview with the airport's federal security director?
They have an interview with the officers that are on scene at the checkpoint, but that's not all that's happening. What those officers are doing are they're talking to—
when you say the officers on scene at the checkpoint, what are we talking about?
The transportation security officers, the uniformed officers at the checkpoint.
Okay, but not the federal security director.
They will bring in the federal security director if needed.
Well, why would that person not be needed if you have someone who's an illegal immigrant?
Right. So we aren't looking at whether a person is legal or illegal in the country. Our function is to make sure that—
Why not?
Because our role is to make sure that people that might pose a risk to transportation that's significant enough to either require enhanced screening or to not allow them to fly, that the proper—
So your position is someone who is known to have violated the laws of the United States does not thereby need enhanced screening? You're not concerned about this person as a security threat?
Sir, there are people every day that violate the laws of the United States that fly. We look for things that are related to transportation security.
And you don't think someone who is by definition, somebody who presents a warrant for arrest, you don't think that necessitates enhanced screening?
They get enhanced— all of those individuals get enhanced screening.
You just told me that it doesn't necessarily involve any interview with the federal security director, and you also said that you may well let them get on airplanes. And in fact, you've allowed at least 1,000 people to get on airplanes this year, calendar year alone.
Right, but enhanced screening and getting on an airplane are two very different things. You know, you can—
So I just don't understand why you have— I mean, I think for every person watching this hearing who has experienced the TSA screening process, it can often be very onerous, it's very long, and in fact, under your tenureship, the times for screening have gone up at airports all across the country, including in my home state of Missouri. St. Louis is now the 6th longest screening process in the country, despite the size of our airport there. People who have done absolutely nothing wrong are law-abiding citizens in every respect, are subject to the most invasive screenings at these airports, yet you're allowing illegal aliens to present warrants for arrest and waving them onto airplanes. How does that make sense?
not doing that, sir.
You just told me that you've let 1,000 people travel on airlines who present to you warrants for arrest.
Yes,
right?
sir. And they present those warrants. That warrant is the beginning of an identity verification process, which follows—
Why isn't it the end? Why isn't that the end of the process? And you say, sorry, you have a warrant for an arrest. We're not going to allow you to get on an airplane.
Because we want to identify who is presenting themselves at the screening checkpoint and ensure that those individuals get the right level of screening. For folks that do not have the acceptable forms of ID that we list on our webpage, they all receive enhanced screening. So every single person that presents a warrant receives enhanced screening before they're allowed to get on an aircraft. Now, if they don't pass that screening, they don't get on the aircraft.
Boy, I think you're going to have a hard time explaining to folks who wait for all of this time in these lines, who subject themselves voluntarily to all of the restrictions that you impose, who are patted down, who are frisked, who are asked to stop aside, who have their luggage rifled through, who have items confiscated from them, who are randomly selected, or sometimes perhaps not so randomly selected for enhanced screenings, but you're allowing illegal aliens with warrants for arrest to get onto airplanes, and you've allowed at least 1,000 of them in this calendar year. I mean, I just find that totally extraordinary.
So through the exchange of that, it should be easy for anyone to see that there is a problem. We should be asking ourselves the important question, how did it even get to this point? How did it get to this point? And the ship is sinking, yet the crew is like, this is fine. They're purposely sinking the ship with the passengers on it. They literally want to bring the passengers down with them. Why is there this huge push on all levels for the destruction of the United States by Americans themselves? Is beyond me. And the hilarious part, it's hilarious in itself, but it's not. The loudest people who are screaming for this, the changes they want to make to the United States, is to put the nation into the position of the countries that the people fleeing them are trying to escape, to get to the United States where the conditions aren't like that. Why do they want to turn the United States into places like that? It's beyond me. But it should be clear to see from anybody that's been paying attention to any of this over these past couple of years, the Democrats are on a warpath to bring the United States to its knees. How much money are they making off of this? Because somebody's getting paid for this. They're literally selling the United States off to foreign nations. Before I go, I want people to really keep in mind, the president has not gone to the border. He's gone to Saudi Arabia. He's traveled to so many different places in the world since he's been president. He can't make it to the U.S. southern border. I should show you where the priorities are. They've screwed up the oil situation in the United States. Refineries aren't refining as much oil anymore. Why? Because they were told they would be fined and heavily taxed if they did. So they started switching to refining other things. The president is trying to get other countries to increase refining. China, we're selling oil to China for them to refine. The president is attempting to beg Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, trying to make deals with Iran to get their oil. Meanwhile, the Russian ruble is going up. India and other countries are buying Russian oil on the cheap. And as I told you before, they're not worried about what the U.S. says, thinks, or whatever. They're not going to let their own people suffer because Biden has a hair up his fucking butt. Literally, countries around the world have screwed the United States because actions by the president are screwing them. And these countries have said, we are not going to let our people suffer just because of Joe Biden. These are things that we should be thinking about coming up in these midterms and with the presidential election coming up in 24. You will hear many Democrats, as they've already begun now, trying to say other things, trying to act like they haven't said the things that they've been saying for the past couple of years. They're hoping you forget. Don't forget, and don't let them get away with that. Keep them on their toes and keep the flames to the fire, or something like that. But we'll see what happens next. But I thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.